about that in just a few moments with our next guest, Transport Minister Richard Holden MP, who joins us now. Good morning to you.
Morning, Julia. How are you?
Very well indeed. Thank you very much for joining us. Before we get to a transport announcement, you're obviously talking to us about they're live from Westminster. I must ask you first of all about this barges story, this giant vessel to be docked off the Dorset coast. It's going to house 500 single young men as asylum seekers. A lot of people will say this is a good idea, but A, it is a drop in the ocean. Quite literally, and B, the local people, Portland Port, they don't want it, including the local MP, Richard Drack. So why have you chosen that area?
Look, I don't think any of us want illegal migrants crossing the channel, but the truth is that we've got to deal with them as quickly as possible when they're here. My understanding is that this is one of a large number of schemes being considered, and not just barges, but also looking at using some of the disused military bases as well. Look, in my own constituency, I've got a immigration removal centre as well. You know, local people are obviously naturally concerned when these things are there, but what they do want to see is this situation tackled. And they do understand that needs to be tackled on a national level, and anything we can do to reduce those pull factors here to the UK, ensure that we have a proper controlled borders and managed immigration system where people who want to come to this country come here through legal routes, is what my constituents, and I'm sure constituents in Dorset, want to see, but also right across the country.
Can I also ask you about Nicola Sturgeon? Obviously, we can't go into the ins and outs, obviously, of a police investigation that is live after her husband, Peter Murrell, was held for almost 12 hours yesterday, arrested but released without charge over this missing £600,000 in campaign donations for a second referendum to the SNP. Big questions, leaving aside that probe, but big questions about Nicola Sturgeon until, only a couple of weeks ago, the First Minister of Scotland and the leader of the SNP, what she knew and when, whether or not this was the real reason behind her choice of resignation, and also whether or not the Scottish police delayed this arrest until after the leadership election being completed for the SNP. Would you care to comment?
Look, I think there are big questions here around the broader questions than the individual case, which obviously I can't comment on. But there are some big questions here for the SNP, who have been so dominant in Scottish politics for such a long period of time. But as you said, there are ongoing police investigations here, so I think it would be inappropriate for me to comment further at this moment in time. But I think it's really important that the police are given the time to really get to the bottom of all these issues that are being raised, because there are obviously some very serious allegations being made here. OK,
there's also some very serious allegations being made against one of your colleagues. This is the Tory MP for Blackpool South, Scott Benton. He's been the subject of a sting operation by the Times newspaper. We're going to talk to the reporter who did this earlier on. Later on, he offered to table parliamentary questions, to leak a confidential policy document and lobby ministers on behalf of the gambling industry, some investors who proposed paying him thousands of pounds a month to basically to do this, obtain behind-the-scenes information. Very different to a sting operation led by donkeys late last month, where it was embarrassing for the various MPs involved, but it wasn't against the rules. What he agreed to do on camera, clearly against the rules. He's now lost the Tory whip, but I mean, I think a lot of my audience will be thinking this morning, Richard Holden, how many of you are at this and just haven't been caught yet?
Look, I think the important thing here is that it's been referred to the Standards Commissioner. I think that needs to happen quickly, and hopefully a quick investigation there. I think it's really important that the Chief Whip has moved swiftly to suspend the whip as well. I think more broadly, though, look, I happen to be on the other side of this debate. I was a member of the APPG All-Party Parliamentary Group on gambling-related harm, where we, working alongside Carolyn Harris from Labour, Ronnie Cowan from the SNP, Ian Duncan-Smith, who's been a big campaigner on issues around gambling for a long period of time, wanting to reduce the harms around gambling. And this has been a big area. Since 2005 Gambling Act, we've seen a real expansion, particularly in online gambling. I think there are some clear issues there which were addressed in terms of fixed odds betting terminals in bookies. We now need that to be looked at online. I know the government's doing that big review at the moment into that legislation. I think it's very important that those things are looked at in the round. But I think in this specific instance, I think, as you rightly say, that it's it's right that Scott Benton has had the whip suspended and is being now subject to a proper formal investigation.
But this is the key thing. I mean, you're paid. MPs are paid by us, the voters, to represent us. Not to take extra payments to it's one thing, OK, you want to go and do a speech somewhere, you want to go and write a book, appear on telly, whatever. But in Parliament, your parliamentary duties, you're supposed to only represent your constituents and causes you care about, not people who are paying you to do that. This is such a clear breach of trust. Should this MP, should he not resign? Forget losing the whip, wait for an investigation. He's been caught back to rights on video, promising to do things that he's not allowed to do. Should he not resign?
Look, there's a formal investigation taking place now. I'm totally on the other side of this argument to Scott. My views on this are very clear and very much on the record on the issue. But what I would also say is that the government has tightened up rules in this area. You cannot do paid-for lobbying, which is exactly what was talked about on that tape. And I think that's been made very clear, which is why there's been such swift action against him.
OK, let's also talk about your area of responsibility as a Transport Minister. There's going to be an extra £47.5 million being spent on enhancing the safety of some of our most high-risk roads in England. Where is that money going? What's it going to be spent on?
So this is really to tackle those smaller roads which have real issues on them. I think what we've done over the last few years is we tried to move away from all the blame for an incident being on one person or on the road, and we're trying to see this as a proper holistic view to try and reduce road deaths on our network at the moment. This is the third tranche of what we're calling the Road Safety Fund. This is going to be on 27 roads right across the country, from the Isle of Wight to the A25 in Surrey, out to the Felixstowe a road going outside of Ipswich, right the way through to Newcastle upon Tyne as well, tackling some of the real issues we've got with roads. What this is doing is looking at a few things. One is things like tackling junctions, adverse cambers on roads, better road markings, better road signage, all that sort of thing to help improve road safety. Okay. And this has got a really good payback as well for the taxpayer, in terms of we've got very good value for money, but also on the other side, we should be seeing this £50 million investment should see 750 fewer deaths or serious injuries over the next 20 years. So that's hundreds of lives which will be stopped from being so adversely affected. A lot
of people,
I'm guessing, all the impact on those families as well.
I'm guessing in each local area where these changes are going to be made, people have been campaigning for this for years, sometimes even decades, waiting for that money, so it'll be well spending. But a lot of people will say a bit too little, too late. Can I ask you about the front page of the newspaper today? They're saying there are no new smart motorways to be built amid safety fears. There's a £3 billion scheme for building these smart motorways. I mean, largely, building smart motorways means not building a new motorway. It means simply allowing people to drive on the hard shoulder, putting up extra signage, electronic signage, and monitoring. Now, we've seen that that's not been happening. It's not being properly monitored. If someone does actually break down, we've seen deaths that could have been prevented if there was a hard shoulder. Very poor signage as well. Is it true that ministers have shelved plans for any new smart motorways in England?
Well, we've already got that pause in place there. There's those 3 smart motorways which were already well under construction, which are being completed. But they're also we're putting £900 million extra into the extra refuge areas right across the country as well. So there's a huge investment there into safety. Another £105 million into better monitoring and cameras as well.
Has it been shelved?
I would also just point out...
Has the policy been shelved? That was my question.
Obviously at the moment what we're doing is we're finishing off those ones. We're putting that extra £900 million into safety improvements. But what I would also say is that the idea that people didn't get injured or killed on hard shoulders is just untrue. They were a very unsafe part of the road network, especially when you don't have that monitoring going on. So that's very important. And more broadly, our motorway network, certainly say compared to our A-road network, because you've got that separation combination of traffic travelling in two different directions are generally a much safer part of the road network, say compared to some of the A roads in my constituency and also across the country, which is why funds like the Safer Roads Fund, to help tackle some of those particularly difficult areas on local roads where people have seen issues over many years, that's why we're tackling that as well.
All right. I'm not sure I got an answer there, but I think we have to let you go because you've got another interview to get to. Really appreciate you joining us on a rather miserable looking day there in Westminster. It's Richard Holden, Transport Minister, responsibility for roads.